Really?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to have to study that. Who do I interview for ambient intimacy?
Stowe Boyd.
Stowe.
Boyd, yeah.
Good to know.
Okay, and who else? Ev Williams, who created Twitter.
I'm trying to interview him. He's following me on Twitter.
Is he really?
Weird,
wow, okay.
but
he doesn't follow a lot of people, so.
He follows like 800 people. That's a lot.
Yeah, but he's got 30,000 followers or something, doesn't he? My general philosophy on life would be to imagine something better and pursue it fearlessly. So I'm Chris Saad, and I've done a few things. I'm the co-founder of a project called the Data Portability Project, and I'm a co-author of a format called APML, Attention Profiling Markup Language, which is a way of storing a user's interests in an open standard way, so they can move their recommendations from Amazon to Dig to Twitter and back again. And I'm also very interested in how technology changes the way people collaborate and communicate, so that we're actually moving to a place where there's hyper-choice and hyper-personalization. So I'm very interested in those trends and the tools and technologies that make that possible. I did always know that I was interested in technology, certainly, and I was the aspects that interested me was the idea that I could manipulate a piece of code and it would affect potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of people in the box. So I liked that feeling, and I liked the idea that I could have an impact on people's lives, hopefully in a positive way. I've always been interested in also turning audiences into participants. So I created an interactive radio show where the idea was that the audience was actually as much a part of the show as the hosts were, with chat rooms and forums and user-generated content. This was back in '99. So I've had an interest in this since fairly early on, and I was actually on a local TV station talking about how important the internet would be at age 10. So the advent of mass media made us all expect some sort of content creators and editors and publishers on high to create sanctioned, high-quality, high-cost content, and then sort of disseminate that en masse to people, and we would consume that in a fairly passive way. And people sort of expect that to be the way media is produced and distributed, but that actually broke a pattern, which is was around as early as the caveman days, which is we actually tell stories to each other, rather than get these mass-produced, high-quality, polished stories told to us. And so social media and these tools, these social tools, have essentially allowed us to go back to an earlier time when we were telling stories to each other and giving our own spin, our own bent on it. And it's sort of going back to the age of word of mouth and creativity, where we are all content creators and we are all participants, as opposed to having journalists or content creators tell us how things work. And as a result, I think that we're reducing the sense of the otherness. We're more connected and more communicative than ever. And sometimes that means we're more passively intimate, and sometimes that means we're more actually intimate. The answer isn't revealed itself yet, but we'll see how it goes. So ambient intimacy is the idea that rather than meeting with your friends once a week and trying to catch up on their week, the idea is that you're actually ambiently intimate with them all day, every day. And that produces a whole bunch of interesting social interactions that are as good or better than catching up at the end of the week. I think the trick to keeping up with this stuff is to recognize that you don't have to. There's an interesting moment in one of my favorite movies, American Beauty, where at the end of the movie he's got this dialogue and he's following a piece of a plastic bag blowing in the wind, and he's talking about how he feels like he needs to hold on to this beauty and he feels like he wants to explode, and then he realizes that he just has to let it go and let it flow through him, and he gets a warm feeling inside. And I think of that often when I think of social media, which is you need to not feel like you need to hold on to it. News is temporary. Your friends' events and interactions are temporary. You just need to let them flow by, and what you catch, and if it's important, it'll probably flow by again. So it's about letting it wash over you and just enjoying the feeling and having some ambient awareness and ambient intimacy of what's going on.
Okay.
So I think that this ambient intimacy has effectively created some of this hive mind mentality, but in less of a Borg, we will conquer your civilization sense, and more of a, there's less of us and them. There's less of us here in America or in Australia and them over there in Iraq, or those really scary people that we don't know. It's allowed us to have this recognition, at least in some of us, that we all have the same basic human desires of safety and shelter and love and reward for work. And so I think that this collective consciousness has effectively allowed us to recognize a collective purpose and a collective destiny in not in an airy-fairy way, but we're actually all connected. It's a one big symbiotic relationship, and we're all essentially the same people with the same set of goals, and I think that's probably going to help society hopefully be a little bit more peaceful, or at least a little bit more respectful, but I'm sure we're a little way away from that still.
We're getting there.
So we're no longer constrained by our geographic boundaries. We're now able to coalesce and communicate with people who have a geography of interest rather than a geography of landscape. And the idea is quite fascinating of how do you discover these people, and how do you cut through the signal and through the noise, and how do you describe your interests in a way that it helps you discover other people. And so certainly it's breaking down all sorts of barriers. When you don't know the colour of the person on the other end, or the geography, or their socioeconomic status, but you know that they're interested in the same things as you are, it starts to break down perceived barriers between us. So yeah, it allows us to recombinate our society at runtime with a group of people who actually are like us. And that's dangerous potentially, because we start becoming quite myopic and we don't get exposed to new ideas. But it's also interesting because we get to maybe explore those ideas more fully. So I think there's probably an upside and a downside, and like anything, needs to be balanced.
How would you suggest someone balance
Turning off the filter. I suggest you turn off the filter every now and then and go to the water cooler. And see what everyone else is talking about, or switch from CNN to Fox and back again, and tune into the other side. Yeah.
What's next? What's next for you?
Next. So, the next step is thinking about the world, or thinking about the web in a way that rather than the users join the tools join the user. And the user becomes the center of their personal experience. CNN's front page becomes Chris Saad's front page. Facebook becomes Chris's personal network. Twitter becomes my friends and family filtered by interest. So it's about putting the user at the center of the production, remixing, consumption, and experiential loop that they're now having to go to Facebook to experience. It should actually follow them around. And I think that's going to become enormously important in the next few years, particularly with an abundance of information creates a scarcity of attention. And so we need to be able to allocate our attention more efficiently, and that means better filters. And a realization that we are the most important node in the network. Each of us are our own personal network. So how does that reshape the web around us?